LaLota.
Chairman, thanks so much. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here and for your staffs for participating today. Gentlemen, as you both know, in 2018, the U.S. Cyber Command was elevated to a unified combatant command, having been previously operating under U.S. Strategic Command since 2009. Cyber is a fairly recent, complex, and critical strength and vulnerability for the U.S., and Space Force is also a very recent addition as well, having been established in 2019. And while I understand the complexities of establishing and ironing out the nuances of these new commands, Dr. Plum, in prior statements made to our colleagues in the Senate, you heard and personally spoke to the criticality of legislation for Space Force, specifically Section 1602 of the fiscal year 2022 National Defense Authorization Act, which designates the Chief of Space Operations as the, quote, force design architect, end quote, for space. So my question, Doctor, is should such a designation be considered for cyberspace as a warfighting domain on par with space?
Congressman, to make sure I understand the question, you're asking if we need a cyber warfare architect?
Yes.
I guess I'd have to think through what that would mean. I feel like it would be General Nakasone and is it as Cyber Command. I guess that's a new question for me. I'd be happy to take that for a look up. I think the fundamental question would be, would it change anything? Or would we already be doing it and then we would just
Are we on the right track right now, organization?
I think we are on the right track. We're investing in our joint cyber warfare architecture in this budget and have continued to do so and making sure that's modernized. And I feel like we are on the right track. The General may have some pieces to add, but I think we're going in the right direction. I'm not sure that designation would change that at all.
So, Congressman, you hit a very important date, 2018. Not only the fact that U.S. Cyber Command's elevated to strategic or to combatant command, but the fact that authorities, policies, and capability come together in 18. We demonstrate that in the defense of the 2018 midterm elections. And then as you see everything afterwards, whether or not it was ransomware, whether or not it was actions against other adversaries, whether or not it's election security, this is the key starting point. And one of the big things that we were the beneficiaries was this committee's decision in the FY 2019 NDAA to call cyber a traditional military activity that allowed us to conduct operations like hunt forward operations. This is tremendously important. I think what you're also talking about is that the work isn't done. And so when you think about cyber, we need to make sure that a simulation capability, much in the same way we have in other domains, is resident within cyber to include and to reinforce the advances we've already made.
Thank you. And following up on organizationally how we're proceeding, Dr. Plum, to you, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict is responsible for information operations, but the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy is responsible for cyberspace operations. So my question is, can you explain the logic as to why these two separate chains are established for operations within the same informational environment?
Yes, thanks, Congressman. First of all, military operations, the chain of command, of course, is through COCOMs or through the Secretary. The policy oversight piece, and then sometimes, so for instance, ASD SOLIC has some secretary-like authorities over SOCOM. But information operations are not just the purview of cyber. Cyber is one vector for information operations. It's certainly not the whole piece. So I actually think that the split does make sense when you take that into account.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And my last question is for the General. General, how do you envision the Cyber Mission Force and the Cyber Operations Force maturing over the next 3 to 5 years?
Congressman, we began with the force, 133 teams. The Secretary in the summer of 2020 authorized 14 new teams to be built. Congress has authorized the funding for that, so we're in the build of 14 more teams. So I think the first part of it is greater capacity. We are on a road to have more teams to be able to do more missions. Secondly is clearly being able to play to our strengths. What's our competitive advantage? Our competitive advantage is information. So being able to further leverage artificial intelligence, machine learning. And the third piece is it's all about our partnerships. This is what we've learned. It's not only the partnerships with the National Security Agency, but broadly, how do we partner with FBI and CISA? How do we look at a series of international partners that provide our nation greater capacity? And most importantly, perhaps, how do we partner with the private sector? This is what we've learned in Russia, Ukraine. The power of partnering with the private sector provides our nation a tremendous advantage that no other nation has.
Thank you, and I'll just close by saying I join with my colleague from Texas in the thought that you are on the front lines of our next biggest battle, and we appreciate the work that you're doing. I yield.